Sup Shredders, my name is Logan aka Spiderhands, and welcome to an SP Reacts where today we have ourselves a track from an actor named Antonio Vergara off of the Vergara Street album, the song titled Clay Angels. And if we switch over to here, we have ourselves a track on Apple Music here. I should note that apparently Antonio is nominated for a Grammy. They've won a few Latin Grammys in the past, which is really cool. It's going to be cool to listen to music from an artist of this caliber. We're going to listen through this track from start till finish, and we're going to hear what we think. Let's do it. Clay Angels, let's go. A really intriguing phrase into the saxophone at the start.
Quiet footsteps, carving sacred dust. No-name children kiss with heaven's rust.
Cool response.
Clay-born angels with destiny's horns. No chronic bird, just a call. And they were lonely prophets of the broken street. We are heaven's orphans with the coldest speed.
Heaven's Orphans is an interesting line.
No road, no shield, just a gold.
Great to adjust the leads to the guitar this time for a bit of variety. And it's also really cool that everyone have a turn, have their own sort of solo section. And tying it back into the saxophone at the end.
Hollow whispers shape the prophet's tongue. Solemn glances where the hymns were sung. The clay cracked hands that would hold the light. No drum at first, just a fall. No blast, no flame, just a soul.
Really classy way to allow the guitars to lead out like that with that vibrato. And that very, very subtle oscillation going backwards and forwards in the stereo field on the way out was intriguing as well. There's a lot to discuss within this one, but we're going to talk about this track more in the conclusion. And so welcome to the conclusion, my review of this track from an act named Antonio Vergara, titled Clay Angels, off of the Vergara Street album. So first of all, what do we think this track is about? We talk about sort of clay angels being sort of heaven's orphans and our hands being cracked and everything like that. And I'm just kind of wondering if it's discussing sort of being sort of born into the streets or Vergara Street and sort of struggling forward and all the hard work we have to do to simply continue to move forward. And maybe the ability to be able to do that present is within ourselves and we're kind of our own sort of motivator going forward. Given the bluesy nature of the track itself, it could be sort of potentially mourning the angels that are stuck on the streets there, getting cracked hands and everything like that. But at the same time, I think there's a sort of a commiseration from the vocalist in terms of how they're sort of relating to it. So they could be from personal experience as well. Either way, it's an interesting story. I think I need another listen through or two to sort of fully understand it and to get the full context. But either way, it's an intriguing start, and I feel like there would definitely be an audience for it. So in terms of, like, so I usually talk about like three things I sincerely appreciate about a track, as well as any sort of applicable constructive critique. The first one I would start with, I love the solo sections. Now, you might be wondering why have I skipped the vocals. I'll come back to them. I thought the vocals were done incredibly well, but I feel like in this track, they were equally as important. One thing that's really special about this track, especially given the length of it at 4.5 minutes, which is outside the 2 to 4 minute sweet spot where, like, you know, if it's too short, you might be missing sort of important context, or if it's longer, you need to really establish variety within the composition between the various components, and you need to have solo sections or interludes or sort of breakdowns and stuff like that in order to keep a verse chorus oriented track, a more contemporary one, interesting. And in that regard, I feel like we excel at that here. We have a lot of different solo sections ranging from the different guitar parts, the saxophone being prominent throughout it, the harmonicas, the organs, etc. We have turns taken within that sort of like later half there between the different instrumentalists, I think, because we have this kind of predominant 12-bar bluesy structure to the main vocal parts, to allow that kind of loop there with the bass drums and, you know, guitars to kind of like be in the background or the ether for everything to alternate on top of is fantastic. And we had different personalities between the different instruments. I feel like the harmonica, there was a lot going on with the harmonica in terms of like the complexity, the technicality of it, the speed of it, all the different notes that were played as well. It was kind of chaotic, but in a way that I think it was maybe their voice as one of the Clay Angels sort of putting their truth forward. I think that a lot of the other instruments being relatively subdued aside from the saxophone up until that point, it gave them a time to shine, and it just shows that they have an innate an understanding of when to sort of support and when to come forward. And it's like kind of a fundamental of, again, like soloing or improvisation in certain genres like blues and jazz, for example, to take turns. If it's too much, it's just going to be too much. But I feel like we had a really good sense of flow and independence between each of the different solo ideas there. They made the most of the textures and times of their instruments in the respective ranges of the frequency spectrum where they stood out the most. They paid sort of homage to the original theme as well. They didn't sort of split or go away from it too much, even when they were, again, a little bit more sort of like chaotic. And I think it was just intriguing to have those different tones and textures and sequence from each other to then come back at the saxophone at the end, which had already had quite a lot of it up until that point. But it was coming back into it after that palette cleanser, everything else that made it more refreshing. And to be fair, when I talk about the harmonica being kind of like chaotic, that's not the entire time. There are some parts of it that are kind of wild. It was just the start of the harmonica part, which I think was trying to contrast with the held notes of the guitars working between the blues and pentatonics part. So, you know, there's more than just that. That's what I'm trying to say. I think that if you're paying attention to the previous soloist and you can change the rhythm or the note choices independent of what they're doing there, it kind of makes it seem like one entire massive solo section, which can be really interesting for listeners. And to be fair, it has similar kind of like phrasing to the organ parts later on, going between different arpeggios or triads and notes there within its melodies. So there was also a rhythmic kind of like connection between other elements that maybe sort of like were separated from each other to kind of riff on the kind of like the main sort of dominant one into an eighth note groove of the kit that was, again, fully supportive throughout. And then also to kind of end on that sense of mystery with the guitar vibrato and to have things going backwards and forwards between the sides of the stereo field was just interesting as a fade out at the end. So I want to also then talk about the vocals. Now, I didn't initially get all the words through clearly. I think part of that is because I was sort of absorbing everything as a whole, and so there was a lot to listen to as well as the vocals, but I feel like we sang incredibly well, very comfortable in a head and chest voice. We've got a very distinctive vocal tone there with lots of vocal fry in it, and it has this kind of raspy kind of feel to it of someone who's really gone through these trials and tribulations and come out the other side a stronger person, able to speak their truth. I can understand why they're getting the attention they are. I feel like when you are able to sort of connect with an audience and not overcomplicate the message whilst allowing a lot of other interesting musical ideas pushed forward, it does offer the best of both worlds. We didn't have the story all the time. We had certain extra little bits of context added as we go through it, again with breaks up of various instrumental parts. But when we did come in, it was impactful. We took the stage, things, again, they came back out of respect, and we kind of had that, again, that extended solo section in the later half of the track led to a final bit of extra kind of nuance there. And we had the entire song in the bag. Sometimes when people write music, they're very sort of vocal oriented there to the point where it can almost be a detriment because there's not a lot else going of other things, but this was not the case here. It's very mature in terms of its diversity. And in terms of singing, quote unquote, the blues, there was very authentic to like 100 years of the history of it. It was just, it was soulful, and you could kind of imagine someone on the steps kind of like singing it with just a guitar in their hand as opposed to the entire band itself. It's just the entire band sort of elevates it further as well. And I think that you need a strong vocalist who is expressing themselves both with note choices that reflect the style of music whilst to also navigate the key signature and the scale as well. You need that intensity to be there with the performance in order for it to be authentic, because if you're not authentic within this genre, within a performance, then no one's going to buy it. But ultimately, I think the final thing here after the vocals and the extra instrumental performances of the structure and the solos, it is the studio production. I thought that it was exquisite. It's a very full sounding mix there. There's a lot going on. Things are leveled to like the nth degree there. It's the vocals do come through clearly with a nice kind of authentic crispiness to them. Again, whether it's the saxophone or the harmonicas or the guitar, the bass, drums or organs, anything like that, they're subtle with dynamic range when they need to be. But again, there's room. It's not just because this is part of why composition is so important and the instrumental layering, structuring of things. You can't just have everything going at the same time. They pull back so that they don't have to do too much work in post. Basically, when people can play their instruments well and there's an innate chemistry and sort of respect for each other, when there's like that planning, you don't actually really need to necessarily do too much in post. You simply need to compress and EQ and add sort of any applicable tails on reverbs or anything like that without overproducing it, and you got yourself a solid sounding track. I've got no complaints at all in regards to how things were leveled in the mix. There were no weird resonant frequencies. It sounded like a live take. It was, you sound like you're in the room with them, you know. Again, they could sing. They didn't need sort of like help in post to hit the notes. And it was nice and loud without pumping, so the bus compression and limiting was handled. Ultimately, there's just so much other stuff I want to sort of discuss here, such as the different sort of drum beats within like percussion, stuff like that. And also the use of scales in the different sort of solo passages themselves, how they didn't just stick with the diatonics or pentatonics, they also went outside of that and used some interesting chromatic notes. But this would be a far longer video with that in mind. Effectively, in terms of constructive critique, there is none. They're clearly very, very comfortable with what they're doing there, and I enjoyed my time listening through it. Ultimately, that's my review of this track from an act named Antonio Vergara, titled Clay Angels, off of the Vergara Street album. And yeah, I had a great time with it. Hopefully you enjoyed it. If you did, please do go show them some love via their various social medias and their Apple Music. Please remember to support your local musicians and artists at this point in time, as they need the help more than ever with all the crazy stuff going on in the world. And I'll catch you in the next SP Reacts. Spiderhands out.